do that. So the way you can volunteer is just to raise your hand. So you click on the like emoji icon, and then we can do that. Jaden and Lex. So we might go to 2 sites. We'll see. So what we're going to do is allow you to talk, which means that you should be able to just press your unmute button and talk to us now. Hello.
Can you hear me? This is Jaden.
Hey, Jaden.
Me and Lex have just joined on the same computer.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you for volunteering. I think a prize will be coming your way for that. But we're just going to now find your site. So I think Loretta's just grabbing, and has done that. Sorry, don't mind us. We're working behind the scenes here.
Just sent the link through.
Sorry.
Can you see that?
It's not the same one we had before, is it?
No, different one.
I think you may have pasted in the same link.
One moment, sorry.
That's okay.
We're looking at Jaden's.
Mm-hmm. Where did you look at, Jaden?
In a section that's one house away from my house.
Right.
And like in the last, say, 12 months, there's been 1 fatality and about 20 accidents.
Wow.
On that one intersection.
So what is the actual intersection? What are the road names?
It's Mary Street and Bacon Street. It's a T intersection.
Yep. I think the link that's in the actual assignment may not be working for me. Sorry.
Okay, so let's go to that. What suburb are we in?
Grafton, New South Wales.
Yeah. Grafton, Mary Street.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Mary Street and
Bacon Street.
Bacon, which
I think I got it now.
Sorry, bear with us, mate. Yeah. Whoa. Okay, now we're in Google Earth. That's all right. Okay, I'm just going to go with the one that I've got here. Sharing screen. And so, Mary Street and...
That's where that pin is.
It is that
pin. No, that's not it.
Oh, no.
We keep going to... Just trying to figure out... Okay, go like down where your mouse is going. Yeah. Keep going. It's just on that, like, see the Bacon Street right there where your mouse is? It's that one there.
That's the one. Okay. Sorry, took us a second to get there. Right. What we want to do is have a bit of a chat about this intersection. We're going to talk through the assignment, sort of that exposure and likelihood and severity, but just tell us a little bit about the surrounding area. If you know it sounds like you do know the area quite well.
Yeah.
So what do we got?
So that where your mouse is, is a primary school.
Yep.
Oh, sorry, an infant school. Across the road where that other big paddock opening is a netball court, like a recreational field.
Yep.
And the little building like above your mouse, that's a primary school.
Mm-hmm.
And across the road is the high school.
The high school?
Yeah, that's the high school.
Okay. Right. And fairly...
It's very straight. It's dead straight. And that, yeah.
Let's jump down and have a look at it from the ground, get everybody a bit of a feel for it. And then we'll work through it from that exposure likelihood and severity perspective. So this is it?
Yeah.
We got 2008 imagery. So they haven't... Oh, here we go. Jumped forward in time. Okay. And jump back in time. Okay. All right. Well, that's given us a little bit of insight there. So let's start and work through exposure and likelihood and severity. So what are some of the factors influencing exposure to crashes here?
So like they're both like really busy streets. So like the traffic volume, and then like I was getting confused with exposure and the other one. I'm just trying to remember what I put in there.
Well, I mean, your first comment there is right on the money, because you're talking about, the volumes of vehicles, the numbers of pedestrians, the
Yeah.
numbers of cyclists. It's all about getting to numbers. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a with the schools being there, it's like high pedestrian area. So like cars will park right down like towards the bottom of the screen and go around the intersection to your left. So they will go through there, and that's where they'll park up.
Yeah.
And they park along there, and the kids walk on that grassy side, and they cross the road here to get to the infant school. Yet some that will jaywalk from corner to corner to get to either side as well.
Yep.
And there's like, as you said, there's no like pedestrian crossing. There's the school sign starts at that big tree. So that's where the school signs, the 40K zone starts on Mary Street.
Right.
So yeah, I think they're like with there being the three like the high school, the primary school, and the infant school, the traffic volume there of a morning and afternoon is huge.
Right. Okay.
So like you get that high pedestrian and high traffic volumes around that drop off and pickup time.
Yeah. So that's it. It's the volumes. There's that exposure influence, and that sort of, if you think about that from the one perspective, okay, we've got people exposed to crash types. Now let's go into the likelihood. And you gave us a few little clues into some of the likelihood factors.
Yeah.
But let's go through them again. Things that are influencing the chance crashes will happen. Now, crashes, there's lots of different crash types that could happen. So what are some of the things influencing all these different crash types that could happen?
One, first of all, is like the sight distance coming along Bacon Street into Mary Street.
Yeah.
So on the other side of the intersection, especially like that tree where that white four-wheel drive is, there's a lot bigger now too.
Yeah.
So to see, most crashes will like happen from cars coming where you are now, crossing the road.
Yeah. Okay.
And yeah, so like the trees always like contribute, and the fact that speed, like the likelihood is the speed people come down, because you see the 50K zone only starts 15-20 meters from the intersection, like the 40K zone. So people fly along there and aren't slowing down until that point.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think especially the sight distance issues will be one of the main, like, especially with the houses there so close to the intersection with the hedges, like vegetation, I think was like the most thing that increased the likelihood of it.
Okay, well, that's definitely a likelihood factor. So categorization wise, big tick there. You're getting the right categorization. Other likelihood factors, anything else that you were thinking about?
The traffic volume was another thing, was the likelihood, which kind of was like exposure and likelihood, I found.
Yeah. So yeah, it depends a little bit. This is on how you're thinking about it. Just the sheer numbers making it more likely for a crash to occur is the exposure.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about like the ability to pick gaps in traffic, and the like, because there's so many vehicles, that's a likelihood one.
Yeah, okay.
It's a little bit hard to sort of separate those two, and that's
and I find too there's a pedestrian crossing to your left about halfway up that block.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you'll get traffic banked up. And so if you're trying to cross the street and there's cars parked up along here, you can't see what's coming the other way.
Right.
Due to the fact of like the cars blocking your sight view. So trying to you see people trying to pick gaps in there. They can't see what's coming the other way.
Right.
To
Yeah.
cross the intersection.
Across there. Right. Okay. Interesting. Or yeah. Okay.
Yeah. To cross there, so they can't see what's coming the other way when they're stopped, when the traffic stopped and banked up.
It's banking back here.
Yeah, or but like it comes to like the intersection about where your mouse is. Usually they don't let it get past there, but you still can't see what's coming to pick that gap to get across the intersection. So a lot of crashes happen. Like as I said, most crashes happen from where you're facing going across, getting hit either side along Mary Street.
Yep. Okay. So some other likelihood factors sort of immediately in there are some of the things like just the fact that it's a give way controlled. So its control is a likelihood factor.
Yeah.
There's other things which may contribute. So how well it's lit, how clear the signage is, an advanced warning or lack of advanced warning, and the straight alignment of both is a likelihood factor. As you've rightly pointed out, some of the sight distance constraints, some of the operational things, as you mentioned, queuing and then dynamic visual obstruction. So yeah, lots of things to sort of unpack associated with the likelihood of crashes. What about the severity? What's influencing the severity of crashes?
Well, I put for it being a T intersection, the angular impact is one. Like what we're talking about on Friday, that angle being like your side on hits with your bullet vehicle hitting the side.
Beautiful. So angle is one there. That's that direct sort of right angle crash potential.
Yeah.
So that's a.
Also putting the severity as the pedestrian versus vehicle collisions. Went back to that very first one we had where your chances of survival decrease at 30 k's an hour. And it's still only signposted at 40. So to me, like Joe, the severity for cars traveling 40 plus and hits a child will raise the severity of it pretty highly.
Absolutely. So like the pedestrian crashes, when we start analyzing them, the speed is so influential on the outcome we're talking about. And it's really great you're referring back to safe system sort of threshold speeds around the 30 kilometers per hour and saying, well, it's going to be above that. I mean, even if they're just following the regulatory speed limit, it's above that, let alone the fact that there's really no sort of traffic calming of any nature here, is there? So the speeds are going to potentially
all the way to the intersection at 50.
Yeah.
And it doesn't start till at that tree is where the 40 starts.
That's it. So they will be, if they were, even for your law-abiding citizens who are sticking to speed limits, they're going to be going quite at speed at these approaches, let alone the fact that we know some people will go faster than that. They've got a straight run, they've got a free run there without any traffic calming. So speeds could be higher. So speed's a big one. You're thinking about vulnerability of different users. You've analysed this one really well. But what were your ideas? How would you lessen some of the risk here? And would it be through exposure changes, likelihood, or severity changes?
I thought you could, like, if you were to put them raised platform surfaces like either side of Bacon Street, would it decrease your like severity and your likelihood to like due to the reduced speeds? Also for like you could do the raised platforms with a roundabout to like decrease that angular impact, slow traffic down.
Yeah,
I thought that would pretty much it would decrease you would think it would decrease the exposure, likelihood, and severity if you were to place those measures in.
It would do So a roundabout and some raised platforms would reduce the likelihood and severity. We probably wouldn't say it would reduce the exposure because
Yeah, sorry.
unless we had some traffic modeling or something that told us actually, yeah, you do all of that,
Yeah.
you're really going to have half the vehicles go through or something like that.
I think in my assignment I put like pedestrian fences as well to deter kids away from the road, like things like that, which they do have further down the intersection between the primary school and the high school. They've got the them pedestrian fences.
Yep.
So, but I think, yeah, that spot there is a massive drop-off area because of that massive grass area there. People park their cars in there and walk their kids over, or the kids walk to their parents' car from there. But and there's nothing stopping, separating pedestrians from vehicles at that point.
Yeah. Okay. So I suppose like full separation with these sorts of things is kind of an exposure one. I think if you a bit of pedestrian fencing to guide a pedestrian to crossing points, we'd usually call a likelihood factor. I'm always a little bit nervous on pedestrian fencing just in case it traps pedestrians on the wrong side. Like they're still going to walk and then they just walk along the road because you've trapped them. But nonetheless, from that, what are we influencing perspective? The idea of a raised crossing or a raised point here, that's an interesting one because for the pedestrian crash of pedestrians crossing, I'd say we reduce the severity. But for the vehicle-to-vehicle crash of the vehicle entering the intersection and being struck by the bullet vehicle, we haven't done anything for the severity because severity is going to be dictated by, exactly as you said, angle, and then we haven't changed the angle, and speed of the bullet vehicle coming in from the side. We haven't changed that.
Yeah, so when I said the rate, like my thinking with the raised platforms was to raise like it all four ways, that whole intersection, lift the whole intersection up.
Beautiful. So then you're onto it. Exactly. Yeah. Sorry, I misunderstood there. I thought you were saying just across here.
No, I meant all four ways to raise the whole intersection.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. That would reduce the likelihood and severity of crash at this location. The idea of a roundabout's a nice one in terms of angle, and it also alert people. So some good options there. Certainly, though, with both of those ones, the raised or the roundabout, the raised intersection will help in pedestrian from the severity sense, but they don't really have their designated ways to get across as easily. So thinking about some pedestrian crossing. But
I thought about a pedestrian crossing, but does that increase your exposure because people are more inclined to use that? And if you just put a pedestrian crossing with no other measures to slow cars down, is that increasing your exposure to pedestrians using that unmanned? Potentially pushing more pedestrians across at that point. Obviously it's like a thing where it's more controlled. People aren't walking here, there, and everywhere.
Yeah,
but more people will be walking to that spot.
Yeah, so I think first of all, you're thinking about, well, if we don't slow vehicles at these crossing points, like, is it going to be good? And I agree with that. Like, we generally know, like, a pedestrian crossing, like a zebra crossing, without any raised things around it, is not a road safety treatment. We still see some pretty bad incidents. Pedestrians are less alert to, with their crossing because they've got priority, and so it's not great. When you raise it, it's exceptional. But in terms of okay, so if we create some crossing points where we know there's good sight distance, so then maybe they're refuge islands or the like, we reduce the likelihood because we're sort of saying, well, they're going to be crossing all sorts of places. If we can consolidate it to one we know has a good sight distances, is clear, and driver expectation is there or a little bit more, we think we reduce the likelihood a bit, but absolutely slowing vehicles on these approaches to a crossing point is the really high line safe system treatment. So you've done well there. This is excellent. I mean, to reduce the exposure at a site like this is very hard. because you're really saying you'd have to block off something. You'd either have to stop pedestrians crossing in the area, or you'd have to stop vehicles, like close these roads, make them go around other. And it's always a little bit hard to actually fundamentally address exposure from that perspective. Yeah, but you've done well there. Okay, well, thank you so much, Jade. Well done. Great description. I think it helps everybody to just have that, hear that discussion, how we're thinking about the intersection, how we're unpacking exposure and likelihood and severity. And you'll see why this helps when we get into our safe system assessment assignments, which are coming up after the end of next module. Great. I'm just going to pop you back into the group there. Thanks again for that. Interesting. Like, I don't like, see, this is one where I go, well, that's not really a safe system assessment issue, but I just don't like, I don't like speed signs on the approach to a intersection like this for a number of reasons. Well, first of all, just from when a driver sees a speed zone sign, they have a subtle subconscious impression that the road continues unabated. So if, I don't know, this was foggy and they were new to here, they would see a 40 and they would think that their road continues, because that's what usually happens. So anytime I see a speed sign on the approach to a give way or a stop or the like, I get a little bit annoyed from that perspective. This is a lower speed environment. I don't like it anyway. You've got a bit of a see-through effect happening here, a bit of tunnel vision. So I don't like that. The second one is that actually this sign, technically, it's 40 Ks, and then as soon as the driver turns, they're out of the 40 K zone, right? So you don't put a speed zone on the approach to that turn, because the road rules dictate that voids that. You actually would have to have 40s here again in order to do that. So it's just bad speed zoning design. The only way you can do this is to make it an area. And this is not an area speed zone. This is a length speed zone. So technically this lasts up to that point. Now, you might say, oh no, but the speed zone starts, the 40 starts there. But the rules say that as you turn, you are voided of speed zone. You are put back to default until you see a sign to tell you what zone you're in. So there is anybody. Now, I'm being pedantic with speed zoning signs. So that's why I said it's probably not a safe system assessment issue. We're not fundamentally going to eliminate death and serious injury at this location by just getting the signage scheme right. But it's a little bit annoying from that perspective anyway. Awesome. Well done. Thank you very much for that. And that's given us a nice leg up into the session. Now, Loretta, am I missing anything in terms of questions or comments? Anybody want to add anything to that?
No, not really. Dylan did mention that there was a wombat crossing that they installed. Not sure if that was current. Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's at that location or somewhere else, but I do love a wombat crossing. In fact, I'm going to talk about wombat crossings a little bit in this session. So I'm going to go through some info. I'm hoping to give you a little bit of time at the end to do your quiz and catch up on that assignment. Now, some of you will have received marks from your Module 2 assignment. So thank you for submitting, and they've been marked by one of our senior or our experienced safe system assessors. They've given you some feedback to help you get your head around that. We can certainly have one-on-one catch-ups if you're still a bit confused. Those who have submitted it, it's not yet marked, that'll come through soon. And if you haven't yet managed to get that submitted, do so. Let's get it in. And it's particularly helpful, before you get your next assignment, to really get your head around that specific in exposure and likelihood and severity. Okay. So oh, sorry, Loretta, you got a question?
Sorry, I just wanted to point out, yeah, Dylan's just put some more sort of comments towards the Wombat Crossing, and it was actually in Grafton. So, yeah, wombats have been a high talking point throughout the town as they have installed them on controlled school crossings. So it really hasn't reduced ELS for majority of pedestrians, only benefits the crossing guard, as these crossings are generally used during those designated school times. Thanks, Dylan.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. Yeah, they like, well, I'll talk a little bit more about wombat crossings, and I may come back and talk about, school crossing points and how to think a little bit about that as we go. But yes, can be an interesting talking point amongst the community. So generally, from the assignments we saw there, most people seem to do pretty well at likelihood and reasonably well at severity. We just had a little bit of challenge with exposure, and that's understandable because it's a fairly new concept to extract exposure out of likelihood in a risk perspective. So I'll just sort of remind you a little bit about what I'm talking about when we're thinking about exposure to crashes. So you remember from one of the earlier modules, I put this up and I said exposure, we can influence exposure by stopping people getting to a conflict point. So we close off an intersection, we close off a road, we've removed the conflict. Or there's that physical separation. So we are giving pedestrians their own space to walk. They don't have to walk on the road. We're giving cyclists their own space. They don't have to mix it with traffic. We remove that exposure in those lengths. So there's some examples of that end outcome, but there is a bit of a definition, and I've been slowly sort of building up your understanding of this over time. So exposure refers to which road users in what numbers are using the road and thus exposed to a potential crash. Measures of exposures are AADT, side road traffic volumes, number of motorcyclists, number of cyclists, number of pedestrians walking along the road or crossing the road. So it's about bringing it back to numbers. So again, let me just sort of explain maybe with an intersection example here. We've got an intersection. The exposure is about the AADT, the amount of vehicles, the AADT here as well. The way we could sort of eliminate exposure to a crash type, say intersection crashes between passenger vehicles, block that road off, stop, make that not an intersection. Then we've eliminated exposure. Or do some measures that we can reduce the actual numbers we're seeing here, diverting them around or the like. Where we actually then do things like maybe a set of traffic signals at this intersection, okay, that doesn't change the exposure because we've still got the same there. We've still got the same there, right? We've lessened the likelihood, haven't we? Because they will know when to stop and when to go, and it's a bit clearer. But signalizing this doesn't do anything for the severity of crashes because these vehicles can still come here at the same speed, and then they run the red light, and we've seen the angle and the speed still the same, and so the crash outcome will be the same. There's going to be less of those happen because it's signalized, but its severity is still the same. To get that severity down, we would think about maybe a roundabout. We think about potentially raising this, so we're slowing those speeds down. These are the kind of things that address the severity of crash. So hopefully that's helping you get that a little bit clearer in your mind. So you've got the Safe System Assessment Framework, the Austroads document. That's in the Learning Management System. It talks through a bit of this. We've created these scoring fact sheets to try and help you to try to clarify some of that exposure likelihood and severity, to try to deal with issues that aren't well clarified by Austroads or departments around Australia. And we've got one, on intersection crashes, how to think about scoring for intersections. Are you adding up the numbers between each leg or the like? And we've got ones here on, cycling facilities. When does is a bike lane a change to exposure or likelihood or severity? Well, it's likelihood. Well, what about if we separate, offset it with a couple of meters of hatching of painting? There is that exposure likelihood or severity? Still likelihood. What if we put a physical barrier system up between the traffic lane and the cyclist? Well, then we're into sort of changing the exposure to crashes. So we'll make these fact sheets available too. In fact, we've popped that into the resources as well, so you can have a look at those as you're ticking along. Let's jump into a bit of the content for today. As I mentioned, we'll have a break in a little bit and hopefully give you some time back. But today's session is around vulnerable road users. We've talked a fair bit about sort of car-to-car crashes that are happening, the types of crashes, the speeds, the impact energy. We've talked a bit about pedestrians and cyclists and that. We'll delve into that in a little bit more detail. I want to talk to you about sort of movement of place and strategic planning of roads and link that to safe system. I'll explain why that's important in a safe system assessment shortly. And we're going to look then at the different characteristics of vulnerable road user needs and what aligns highly with safe system principles and not so good as well. And we'll, of course, continue to categorize into exposure and likelihood and severity. I'm going to explain movement of place. Some of you will be movement of place experts. You'll know this really well. Some of you, it might be a bit of a new concept to you, or you might have heard of it talked about in a different form, like link and place or other things. But I'm going to use this fairly simplistic diagram of movement of place because I think it's an easy way to get your head around it. This happens to be an old Sydney one, but there's many of them out there I could have used. On the y-axis, we have this term movement. Now, that is the movement of people and goods. It's not necessarily the movement of cars. It could be the movement of bikes. It could be the movement of public transport. It's about movement of people and goods. The x-axis is place, right? Place value. So this is to say, what is this area in terms of a place for people to congregate, to meet, to socialize, to interact, to trade? What is this area? And so the recognition here is that roads and streets provide more than just a movement function. We think of them, and they were originally developed often as just movement corridors. Where it's a road; it's there to move vehicles or horses or whatever it was in the day, right? But then community established around these, and place value was developed. So then we've got now an area that is a movement corridor and has some place value. And what we are doing in this movement of place categorization is to start to understand, well, where does it fit within that? Is it high place and low movement requirements and aspirations? And if so, we're talking about maybe down here in this category of place for people. Is it a high movement, high place? We're in the vibrant streets. Is it a movement corridor? Is it a dedicated cycleway? Or is it a dedicated, traffic priority route? Your easiest and sort of clearest one there is your motorway, which is high movement, no place. We don't want it to have place value. We don't want people hanging out there and socializing, congregating, trading, having a coffee, and the like. So let's just sort of work through these, and I'll explain then why we care about this in a safe system assessment. And, well, spoiler alert, we care about it not because it changes the actual assessment, but it's because it changes what we will recommend as any alterations to a project. Because I can get you high alignment with safe system principles down here by making it 30 km/h zone, putting in some raised platforms and the like. But that's just not fitting with the function of what we're trying to achieve out of that. It's definitely safe system aligned. Don't get me wrong there. Likewise down here, I can get you good safe system alignment by putting up concrete barriers, blocking pedestrians getting into this area, and you can go through at speed. But again, we've just absolutely eroded the place value of the area. So it's not achieving our strategic objectives of that part of the network. So let's start with the sort of place for people. And it was fascinating watching the COVID pop-up infrastructure that was occurring and how people were sort of almost more recognizing the place value aspirations of a road or a street in that very short period of time, which was interesting. But let's get you doing something, because I've been talking already for a bit. But okay, if you had a street like this, a cartoon impression, which is always, got technical errors and things in it, but don't worry about that. So we're just generally thinking, if this was area, we were saying, this is a place for people. We want to aspire to alter it to be really place for people orientated. So low movement function, high place for people. What sort of changes do you think we could make to this infrastructure to improve safety, to get us better safe system alignment, but also facilitate that higher place value? And now here's a little thing. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to do that, but I'm actually going to ask you to come up with ideas and to tell me whether they're influencing exposure or likelihood or severity. So I don't know, if you said, for example, improve the lighting, which would be weird because, you don't know what it is, but you would say lighting bracket likelihood or bracket L. So pop in a few ideas in there. How do we get better safe system alignment from this sort of area? And how do we enhance it as a place for people to hang out, to trade, to congregate, to socialize? And are the changes you're proposing to make going to influence exposure or likelihood or severity? So I'll give you a couple of minutes to have a think about that, pop some ideas in, and we'll then have a look at what comes through. Okay, we're seeing some good ideas coming in. And I really like the fact that lots of people are putting that exposure and likelihood and severity, which is so critical to this way of thinking in this safe system assessment methodology. So thank you, and thanks for such good interaction. I won't get to go through all of them, but I'm going to just scan through and talk to a few of the things. So we've got quite a few people talking about getting the speed limit down and getting the speed down. So it's interesting. We've got both people saying speed limit reduction, and so that will reduce the likelihood and severity, and they're right there. So if we put the speed limit down, others have got some ways to reduce speed, which are more sort of physical treatments as to ways to do that. We've got a narrowing of the road as an option, and that's another good one. Now, interestingly, when we're thinking about a safe system assessment, narrowing the road, we just talk about as a reduction in the likelihood of crashes. And if we are pretty sure it's going to reduce speed, we talk about that as a severity reduction as well. We don't talk about it as an exposure reduction unless we have, again, like modeling or something that tells us the reduction in vehicles that would go through there. But here's I'm just going to use a little bit of a corner of the screen here. If you have a road and pedestrians sort of have to cross the road, and you do something to, narrow the road down, however you've sort of done it, so the crossing distance is less, that's not changing the exposure. That's just because the exposure is the number of pedestrians and the number of vehicles. It's reducing the likelihood of crash because they've got less distance to travel. So designated pedestrian areas and cycle paths and the like, well, there is an argument that does tick into exposure because if they're not traveling along the road and mixing there, they're not exposed to that crash. So some people have wanted to remove parking. Now, this becomes a really interesting one, and I think you can see sort of from this diagram, we've got kids trying to cross hidden behind cars and the like. So yes, we reduce the likelihood of crashes because sight lines are opened up, but it's always important to remember that you remove parking, you give more width to a road, and then higher speeds sometimes come through. So if you're removing parking, you look to, narrow roads, do local area traffic management features, slowing vehicles down, get that speed down as well. Okay, Michelle's come up with a shared zone, and I like this. I think prizeworthy to talk about shared zones. I think that's getting us to the point of sort of very high alignment with safe system principles, but also really enforcing that place for people feel. So a shared zone, for those who aren't familiar with it, is an area where pedestrians have priority over vehicles for the whole area. And those sort of things are really highly place aligned. Some good other ideas. Mustafa's has come up with one that I think is also prizeworthy: reduce access to vehicles. So, why, if we've identified this as high place value, why are we letting vehicles through this area in the first place? Your ultimate in high place value areas does not have vehicles. So if you, in your strategic planning of an area, have identified, hey, this is place for people, this is absolutely about place, and we're not thinking about movement, you don't need to provide vehicle access. And that's a really great starting point. And you sort of notice that it sort of flows its way down out of this as more movement requirement is put in there. And Peter's, put it in there nice and bluntly, just make it a mall or a mall, depending on where you come from. Actually, I think there's only one place in Australia that calls them malls, which is Bendigo, Victoria. But if you're in a town that calls it a mall, I'd be interested. It's a mall. Okay. So thank you, everybody. Wonderful contributions. So, artistic impression again here. So yeah, take it all, great with a grain of salt. But you can see here that very much the slow area, wider footpaths, great. You can see immediately it's going to be A, safer, and B, a better place for people. These lower speed areas, I don't think you need designated crossing points. This is shared zone, in my opinion, and you could just sign it shared zone in its own right. In fact, as soon as you designate a crossing point, you've lowered the place value of an area, because you've said that's a road, that's for cars and pedestrians, you can cross there. Of course they're going to cross wherever they want, but it's just immediately starting to lessen place value. As you have more movement required through an area like this is where you start to segregate out modes. Okay, and then you're getting good movement through here for cyclists, and that's a movement corridor, public transport movement corridor, and vehicles can get through as well as movement. But you can still see the place value of it is quite high and quite well retained. Okay, so we could do sort of similar, and we will, through different categories here, but I do want to keep ticking along a little bit. When we get to low place value and low movement, this is what we'll call local streets. Now, local streets is this category, this term, which was used in this particular movement and place framework. But I'll just flag that certainly individuals believe their own streets often have high place value. So you can't really talk about it to them like this. But this is a holistic strategic planning framework. But when you are in these situations, you can really start to play on this lower movement requirement and start to do things like restricting vehicle speeds heavily, blocking off through routes, so making it so it's not an easy rat run, and you get some good features through that. So artistically impression here, local street. It's very busy, sort of built up local street, but again, we can talk about making that narrower, slower, and you do end up getting some more place value out of that. But let's go to vibrant streets, and I think I'll actually mix vibrant streets exercise with our break to give you a nice long break, and we'll do the same exercise as we did with those place for people areas, but we'll do it for vibrant streets. Now, vibrant streets is where we've got this high place value as we had before. We're trying to make this a really great place to hang out, to socialize, to go for a drink and these sorts of things. But we also have this high-ish movement requirement for people and goods through an area. Now, of course, you're going to need to do a lot more thinking and planning and work to really come up with these things. But let's take this, again, artistic impression. It's a US diagram, but this is what it currently is. It's got that 70 km/h speed limit. It's got that pedestrian overpass. It's got some fencing. It's got a big wide, lots of traffic lanes. It's got some pedestrian fencing in the middle of the road. We've got bikes going along there. But we want to make this what we call that vibrant streets area. So we want it to have high place value and high movement function. So I'm going to give you a good sort of 6 or 7 minutes, because this is your chance to go fill up a coffee, have a stretch, and then sit back down and ponder and jot in a few ideas on how we would change this type of road environment to get us better safe system alignment to make the whole thing safer and give us place value, but also give us some sort of movement of people and goods through the area in whatever form that might take. So 6.5 minutes, and then we'll get back into it. Pop in any other questions you've got into the chat as well. Okay.
See you soon.
Well, thank you. I see lots of people putting in their ideas, and this is there's some good ideas in here. So we've seen pedestrian operated signals as an idea, and that will reduce the likelihood of crashes for pedestrians that are crossing the road. Segregated pedestrian cyclists from vehicles and reducing speed, reducing the pedestrian crossing distance, reduce number of lanes. So lots of good ideas in there. I didn't have too much categorization of those into exposure, likeness, area, but certainly all good ideas. I'll keep moving through. I'm not going to get to everybody's again. Nadia's come up with some great ideas as well in there. Transit lanes, separation of bikes and footpaths and making those clear areas. Removal of barriers to pedestrians. I think that to me is a very important one to think about, because it is a place value initiative. And we did recognize this was high place values and more crossing points. So I think a prize there for just that sort of thinking about the place value specifically. And Leonard has come up with one that I also want to give a prize to, just for categorization as well. I mean, great thinking and ideas here, but some really good categorization in there. Lower speeds as well. And a good one from Peter as well. Let me talk to a few of them. Thank you for everybody for popping those in. I was sort of distributing a few prizes out there for some different ones, slightly at random, but well done to everybody. The pedestrian overpasses are actually something that reduces the place value of an area. Very much about pushing vehicles through at speed. And, you know, in a traffic priority route, which is just about movement, sure, pedestrian overpasses, underpasses, get the pedestrians out of there. Like, I don't want them anywhere near, because they, you know, might impact on that. But where you're actually trying to have high place value as well, they don't actually help with that at all. Nor does this sort of pedestrian fencing to block pedestrians off from crossing and corral them into different areas like sheep. That's not a place value addition. Okay, you might be able to get some safety out of this, but we're thinking more holistically than that. But if we look at these sorts of areas, just as many of you sort of came up with there, we can think about those specific modes. We can think about providing great facilities for bikes, for pedestrians to walk, but also have that place feel to it. And, you know, you've got good movement function here. You've got movement function of public transport, of cycling, of walking, and yes, you've got some vehicles. If you take a very traditional movement of cars look at this, it's going to be less, but we're trying to sort of move a bit beyond that. But of course, these are really, you know, leaps in the changes to these road environments. What we will see is it sort of trickle in over time. We do see some of this sort of stuff. We're seeing now more of these separated cycling facilities entering into these roads, and that's creating good movement. It's starting to add a bit to the place value of areas, as opposed to sort of, you know, 2 lanes of fast moving traffic. We're slowing traffic down. We're creating facilities for pedestrians, for cyclists, and it adds to the place value of an area. When we get to these sorts of bike facilities, Copenhagen style lanes can be one way, can be two way. We're starting to now think about this is reducing the likelihood of crashes for cyclists. Now, you may argue that it's a reduction in the exposure to cyclists. I would just say in this particular one, I feel that it's too easy for a vehicle, to enter that lane and still hit a rider. They could be texting, they could have, whatever it is, they enter that, they hit. Plus, they've got to turn in and out of all these access points, which you can see are highlighted green with some conflict paint. But we really, to say that it would eliminate the exposure to crashes with cyclists, I think is a bit too much. If it was fully barriered off and no access points, then I'm up for that as calling that exposure. But in that one, I just call it reduction in the likelihood of crashes. When we get to these high movement corridors in their own right, you are asking then those questions. Well, movement of people and goods, but how? Is it a traffic priority route? Is it a cycle route? Is it a public transport route? Give me a bit more to that. But if it's these traffic priority routes, that's where we start to create, more stopping of pedestrians crossing at different locations, overpasses, underpasses, and really keep that traffic pumping along through. If it's a cycle way, the same. You don't want pedestrians hanging out, trading, interacting in these cycleways. But it's about moving cyclists through as quickly as we can. Of course, in these movement corridors, we still need to think about conflict points. We need to think about energy at these particular conflict points and interaction points. So we are still talking about slowing vehicles down at these intersections where the crash can occur and where the energy is above tolerable limits. But let's have a look at pedestrians and cyclists in particular, and we'll talk about the fact that they are the most vulnerable to injury. I think Jaden nicely put that earlier about thinking about those sort of 30 km/h as your highest sort of tolerable speeds, and you really want to be below that in the sort of 20 km/h range where we've got this high potential for pedestrians or cyclists to be hit. Young and old even more vulnerable to injury, and we really want to get those speeds down. So if we start with cyclists and we go back to talking about these separated treatments, they do work really well. They're, predominantly the idea is to, remove the exposure to crashes, move that interaction with vehicles as much as we possibly can. And we see a lot of positive road safety outcomes from this, plus all the spin-off benefits, which we really, as a safe system assessor, aren't, what we're too, it's not front of our requirements in the assessment, but we get, more people cycling, and we get better environmental outcomes, and we get better social outcomes, and all sorts of wonderful benefits. When we get to intersections, it can be problematic. Now we know that sort of the intersection forms where we've got roundabouts, for example, in these urban one lane roundabouts, single lane roundabouts. Getting our best safe system alignment involves that separation and that slowing of vehicles and priority for cyclists. Now, the priority for cyclists, again, is one where it's a bit of it's encouraging cycling. It's making it a more friendly cycling environment. The safety outcome of this really comes from clear crossing points, raised, lowering speeds, and that separation of cyclists from the circulating carriageway of vehicles. So, like for this one, if you haven't seen them before, I mean, this is to do a right turn. A cyclist will come up here and they'll go on to their priority area, and then they'll go out there and continue on. Vehicles slow, they give way to pedestrians and cyclists. So there's that one built. That one's a Melbourne example. That's Moray Street roundabout. You can see there, the facility. It has really high alignment with safe system principles. It works really well. This is the kind of thing I think we should be aspiring to, where we have that high pedestrian and cyclist demand and movement and catering for them. The old way of sort of pushing a cyclist into the circulating carriageway, it works for some road users, but a lot of people are not, riding and the like, and they don't want to take that on. Two-lane roundabouts are extremely problematic for cyclists, and really you'd want to completely eliminate exposure if you have two-lane roundabouts by doing underpasses and overpasses, like as the Dutch would do from day one. You would mix bikes with 2 lanes of traffic. Crazy. In Australia, we're not quite at that. There's lots of different designs coming out, like this one, which has some priority crossings for cyclists and pedestrians. It's also got some designated crossing points which try to reduce the likelihood of crash as much as possible. But I think we can probably do a bit better than that. But at a generic sort of safe system philosophy perspective, I think this diagram, which is an adaptation of a Dutch diagram, is pretty good. It's got sort of 0 to 30 is the possibility of having road space shared in one way or another by pedestrians and by cyclists and vehicles. Then you're into full, like, proper separation with curbing and or parking and the like. And then up at the higher speed end, you want fully separated bike facilities. You don't want bikes anywhere near the roads. It's so far beyond the tolerable limits when crash happens. So, we still see occasionally new roads at 80 kilometers per hour, duplication jobs, putting bike lanes on the road. I mean, that is very far aligned from safe system principles, because we know people will drift out of their lane. The speeds of that impact are just so far beyond tolerable. That's where we need that fully separated facility, eliminate the exposure to bike crashes. So pedestrians are really our most vulnerable road user in terms of the injury. And we talked a little bit as a group about wombat crossings and their advantages and disadvantages. I thought I'd pop in one from another country. It's a New Zealand example. They used to use red for a lot of their pedestrian crossings in New Zealand. They've stopped doing that. They've put out a specific note to say they don't do that anymore due to contrast for some visually impaired people is a bit lessened. And they certainly don't do those courtesy crossings is the other thing that they've put a big no on. A courtesy crossing is one where you don't actually have pedestrian priority, but you sort of paint the road and try and make drivers have some courtesy. And yeah, it's just confusion of priority. It's not a good look at all. I just saw Dylan's question pop up. So it's funny, 3D crossing in Manly. There's lots of these have popped up around the of recent times. So funnily enough, I did about 20 years ago, I did a study of perceptual countermeasures, but trying to create the impression of a raised treatment in Rutherglen in Victoria. It's a country town. About 20 years ago, some colleagues and I did it. Same principles. We didn't have social media at the time. Maybe more people would have known about it. What we found is that it was effective for about the first week, and then everybody knew it wasn't there. And we and ahed about the wider implications of that, whether there could be spin-off effects that people are less sort of trusting of different bits and pieces. Anyway, so I think they're a bit of a gimmick. I think a proper raised crossing point is fantastic. We know it's fantastic. It is so well proven that we'd always opt for that over things. But that being said, I always like people trying to innovate, trying to do new things, trying to make things look, well, try and make things safer. And, we may discover things that really work quite well. Perceptual countermeasures as a whole suite, there's a bit more proof that we can get some good road safety outcomes in more rural road environments, or an approach to intersections in higher speed environments by doing things like tightening up guidepost spacing, like making it so they get closer together on the approach to a point because it'll flick past a driver's eye or a rider's eye. We can do some particular line marking on the approach to curves, and that'll slow vehicles down and slow motorcyclists down and put motorcyclists in better positions to curve. So in the whole suite of perceptual countermeasures, we've got some proof those are more effective. The more 3D visual art crossing points, the evidence is less to actually show that they are as impactful. But certainly they make great social media posts.
Ready for another question?
I am. I saw you pop up there on my screen, Loretta.
Thank you. So the urban design factors such as rock walls, planting in roundabouts do look lovely. But do you have any thoughts or guidance on how that is balanced with safe systems principles? i.e., would lower speed be enough to account for risk of vehicles striking the rock wall landscaping?
Yeah, well, it is a really good question. And that's where often a safe system assessment is starting to assist, because you kind of need to look at these on a case-by-case basis. And then you need to think about, well, how do we get the highest alignment with safe system principles, but retain some of their objectives? And that's what I was trying to talk to a little bit about with the movement in place. Like, understanding a project team's objectives helps you as a safe system assessor to give them recommendations. And so I think that there is, great potential for us to have really good planting, different landscaping, really make beautiful areas that align really highly with safe system principles and give us different transport objectives. But it's just about thinking that through with a real understanding of exposure and likelihood and severity, and how we're influencing each of those in the outcome. So there's lots of good examples out there of where these have been achieved. I think keeping abreast of new technologies in terms of barrier systems that are available, high profile barrier curbing, which is specifically designed with impact in mind, I feel is actually underutilized, because people get, they want to do planting of trees in areas. They still want to retain some vehicle speed, but they, so we're always worried about vehicles running off the road and hitting those. And, big swathes of barrier system is, unappealing, plus pedestrian access. I think high profile barrier curves in some of those situations are a bit underutilized. It's not a bad treatment. And it's much, it's an actual thing. It's not like, just a normal barrier curb, like sort of that. Actually that's a better bit of barrier. It's a proper, sort of sits up higher. It's a particular designed feature. So wombat crossings, likelihood and severity, and that's one looks much more familiar to us, really, doesn't it? You get lots of advantages in terms of pedestrians are better in the field of view. There's clear priority. We've got vehicles slowing, and just ticking all the boxes of safe system alignment, raised pedestrian crossings. interesting little one I'll just use as a story is that we've known what the safe system is for pedestrians for a long time. And this is an old photo out of Adelaide. And yeah, so the road speed limit was 60 kilometers per hour here. And then because there was some work happening in the island here behind this barrier, so they dropped it to 25 kilometers an hour, which is the South Australian speed limit for work zones. That could have been a trivia question I asked, actually. That would have been a good one. It's the only state that does a 25 kilometer per hour work zone speed limit, but nonetheless, so 25. They put up the barrier systems because, you know, there were people working in that area. And they did their work. They were doing electrical works and the like, and they finished all of that. And they took away all the barriers and they put the speed limit back up to 60 kilometers per hour. And then about 3,000 pedestrians a day stand in that area waiting to cross the lights and go back and forth. Now, why are we providing the workers with a safe system, but not the pedestrians who are just trying to cross the road? And some people say, well, it's because the workers are concentrating on their work and the pedestrians should be concentrating on the vehicles and the crossing task. And they know the pedestrians are concentrating on their phone and they're intoxicated and you know, there's all sorts of reasons why they're higher risk than the actual workers themselves. But it's proof that we understand safe system philosophy, and we've understood it for a while from a workplace health and safety perspective. And it's about thinking, can we provide that level of safety culture and safety thinking to the traveling public as well, those walking, those cycling, those in their cars and the like. And it gives an interesting perspective on sort of, okay, we know what the safe system is. It's just how do we apply that? But we are getting better over time, even with those sorts of things. I think public transport of any description is fascinating. If you do a safe system assessment in an area that has a public transport stop, be that a tram stop like this one, or a bus stop, or a rail station, the likelihood of pedestrian crashes goes up significantly, right? I commissioned a study a while back while I was in government around some of this, and it's where we have a public transport stop or line, we have double the pedestrian risk as a similar route without a public transport, even sort of factoring in exposure. And why is that? It's because when people's tram is coming, they take extreme risks to get onto that. And they'll do it for a bus, and they'll do it for a train. And I'm sure you've all seen it. I'm sure a lot of you have done it. And, you know, those risks happen. So we can account for that in our safe system assessment by increasing the likelihood of pedestrian crash significantly because of that public transport stop. Now, some things we know just really align well with safe system principles for pedestrians. Raised crossings I've talked about, raised intersections, another beautiful one. So yes, we've got that nice signalized intersection which provides crossing facilities for pedestrians, but the severity of incident can still be there. So the raising of this then moves it to a reduction in the likelihood and severity of crashes. This one I think is interesting also from a design perspective. When you raise intersections like this, you often align the grade with the curb. You can see that there. Okay, we've got to an even grade there. What can happen there is that we have vehicles tracking more now into areas where pedestrians store. so larger vehicles, but also cars taking sharper cut throughs. And so you always just got to be a little bit aware of that. And this one has done the nice use of these bollards. I think these are OmniStop bollards, which are a bit, flexible in their own right, but they're not flexible. They have a cartridge in the ground that moves a bit if it's struck. It won't actually, so they stop vehicles, but they're a great, thing to make sure that pedestrian is protected a bit, as well as just design specific for you. There's lots of design specifics and considerations in these race intersections with ramp grades and drainage and the line marking and signage of it, these sorts of things. But I think that's I wanted to point that other one out. The threshold treatments into areas and raising the crossing points, I think mixing and combining these, beautiful ways to reduce the likelihood and severity of crashes. And just getting speeds down. This is a simple one graph that just shows the year, no prizes for working out which year the regulatory default speed limit in urban areas went from 60 to 50, because you can see the step change there in the number of pedestrian casualty crashes across the country, I think. A brief chat about motorcyclists, and then I'll let you get into your quiz and finish off your assignment and prepare yourself for the bigger assignment. Motorcyclists are challenging when it comes to thinking about safe system, but certainly as a safe system assessment, we will think about, and we are forced to think about, motorcyclists as a distinct category, and to think about the crash exposure and likelihood and severity for riders. And I sort of like to think about these 5 S's, which I talk about: the sight, the signs, the surface, the strike, and the speed. So the idea there being that, if we can see a motorcyclist better, and if the motorcyclist can see what's coming up, and we've provided a good surface and good warning signs, informing signs, and guiding signs, the likelihood of crashes has been reduced. We then think about, okay, well, when a rider crashes, what are they hitting? And what, is it something like a tree or something, point source hazard, or is it something that they will run along? And then what's the speed of this? And the speed of it will influence both the chance of the crash and how bad the outcome of that crash is. So there was some more recent research released in 2019 around crash impact forces and survivability for motorcyclists, or MASE 3 and fatality, which is a high-level serious injury and fatality. And you can see there, I'll pop them in, you can have a look in more detail in the notes if you want. But what we know is that motorcyclists sit somewhere between cars and pedestrians and cyclists. And I think most of you probably intuitively would have known that. But motorcyclists crashing, it can take a bit more force than a pedestrian or a cyclist. Now, some people think, okay, well, that's obviously because of the helmet and the like. Yeah, yes, the helmets are better. It's partly that, but I actually, from some of this research and a few other reasons, for me, it's somewhat also to do with just the physical stature of a motorcyclist or a common motorcyclist. We see the bulk of our motorcycle community being a particular cohort, which have a physical stature that can handle more force. So, and I don't mean that like they're all, big, strong bikies. I mean that we don't see old, frail people riding motorbikes as much, or we don't see very young people riding motorbikes. But we do see them as pedestrians and sometimes a bit more as cyclists. So that's why there's a bit more in there. So if we just go through briefly those 5 S's, and if we talk about sight, can you see a motorcyclist, and can motorcyclists see what's coming up? We know that motorcyclists are smaller, they're hidden behind objects. You may have picked where the motorcyclist was there behind the tree. But that wouldn't be generally considered a sight distance impediment in that form, but enough to hide a rider. And so we're starting to factor some of this into our likelihood scoring for motorcyclists. Will they be able to be seen? Are they hidden behind other objects? Then if we go to the surface, and the surface we provide, motorcyclists take corners and curves on a lean, and thus we have this weird sort of alteration of center of gravity and this high reliance on the pavement to keep the traction and control that. So surface conditions are just super important for motorcyclists, well above any other road user. Cyclists have some challenges with surface as well, and it can influence the likelihood of crash, but the speeds that most cyclists are traveling is less, and there's less likelihood and severity of outcome. But we know that motorcyclists are called the canary in the coal mine when it comes to surface issues. We really need to think about that surface in the sense of potholes, rutting, flushing, bleeding pavements, bad skid resistance, anything in the surface that creates that change in skid resistance or change in surface. We then elevating the likelihood score. So that could be even things like steel plates and things in these urban environments, which will create slippery surfaces for riders if it's a bit wet, a bit of rain or the like. Signs. So good signage in general helps reduce the likelihood of motorcycle crashes. If we have particular hazards for motorcyclists, we can deploy this one. Most of Australia accepts this in one form or another. It is a motorcycle specific warning sign, and you would use that with a supplementary plate to talk about some issue that's worse for motorcyclists than it is for other road users. And that could be some surface deficiencies that cars and trucks are going to be fined for, but motorcyclists could have an issue. It could be particular curves or other reasons. Now, we talk about strike hazards for motorcyclists. We're thinking about now, energy management for riders, and it's quite challenging. So I'll show you a little video here, which is the European crash test for barrier systems for motorcyclists. And the way this test protocol is deployed is that you get a motorcycle crash test dummy, as you can see up the top there. You put it into levers and you put a helmet on it, and you actually weld its thumbs and do a couple of other little minor modifications. But then it is slid on a little sled and then released at 60 kilometers per hour directly at the post of a barrier system. And that's one test, 60 kilometers an hour. There's another test which actually is between the two posts. And so you can see this is where underrun protection sort of comes about. So underrun protection, for those who don't know, is a second rail at the bottom. But we're talking about trying to analyze the severity of impact here. So let me show you the 60 kilometer per hour. There you go. You slide your dummy in, and that's easily enough to kill the rider. So the dummy has had forces exerted on it that kills it. When we've got the underrun protection, though, we see a redirection of energy. Okay, you can see that absorbs the energy a little bit and redirects the energy along. that's back in survivable territory when you've got that underrun protection there. Okay, it's not going to be the most friendly thing to happen, but it's going to be survivable for the rider. And it shows us that we can start to do a few things that reduce the severity of impact for riders through managing energy like this, through cushioning in some areas, through the use of more frangible signage with motorcycles as a specific consideration in that sense. But all of this being said, it is very challenging. And you'll probably find as you do safe system assessments that motorcyclist severity of impact will be high in your existing conditions and high in your design. Before I jump onto speed, I will check if there's any questions there.
Yeah, there was just a comment there. What about the wire rope?
Yeah, excellent question. And I think that I'm just seeing now that it's also Chris underneath has asked about wire rope safety barrier as well. So 2 questions on wire rope. Yeah, okay. So the motorcycle community has had some concerns in the past about wire rope safety barrier systems and the potential for the wires to slice riders. And okay, visually that image is quite well, it's quite vivid, isn't it? And that's why it sort of comes up a lot in my opinion. The University of New South Wales has done like about 10 years worth of research on motorcyclists hitting barrier systems, and there is no evidence to show that wire rope systems appear as a large proportion of death and serious injury for motorcyclists. So there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that wire rope safety barrier systems are used on long, relatively straight sections of road. They're essentially a fatigue management device to a degree. Like people leave the road because they've fallen asleep on these big long straights, and there's wire rope systems there. You can't physically put a wire rope safety barrier system on a windy route. So if you take sort of the Great Ocean Road or Waterfall Way or, these popular motorcycling routes around Australia, you will just find that if you ever actually tried to put a wire rope safety barrier system in there, it wouldn't work. I mean, there's an absolute minimum 200-meter radius. So we're looking down on a wire rope safety barrier system on a, there's a road there, for example. If you put a wire rope safety barrier system down on a curve like that, and then you tension it up because it's a barrier that we put in tension. As you tension it up, the posts start to bend because the wires want to, go to the middle of the road. So we can't really use it on these popular motorcycle touring routes, even if we wanted to. So there's that. Motorcyclists on these big, long straights, up the Hume, up the Pacific Highway, up, the Bruce Highway in these areas, they're not falling asleep and leaving the road the same way passenger vehicles are. So they're not interacting with these wire rope systems in that sense. So what we actually see is that motorcycle crashes represent about 15 or 16% of death and serious injury in Australia. Of that, so that's 15% of that. Of that, somewhere in the order of 25% involves, or 25% involves motorcyclists hitting barrier systems as the cause of death or serious injury. Of that, less than 1% of those is striking wire rope safety barrier systems. Okay, and within that, which we're talking about, literally a handful of crashes that have happened over the past 10 years across Australia and New Zealand involving motorcyclists hitting wire rope systems. Of that, we've seen all of them bar one, where it's been the rider hitting the post, sliding and hitting the post where they've been killed. And we have seen some very distressing, tragic incidents of decapitation and limbs ripped off. They have not touched the wires when that's happened. That's been the post. The one crash where they did hit the wires, it was at the end terminal where the wires bed into the ground. And so that was some wire impact. It still didn't slice the way people, have portrayed this image. So the one thing we have not been able to address is the fact that the posts themselves do present a fairly high severity impact for riders, and we haven't been able to address that. So Pero's said it there nicely. I mean, the severity is still high. I mean, a motorcyclist hitting a wire rope system post, the severity is going to be high if they're going at any speed, and they usually are going at speed. Mind you, if the barrier is not there and they hit a rock, they hit a tree, they go down an embankment, severity is still high. So, but that being said, if we could put a barrier system, like a WB flexible barrier system with underarm protection, then we've lessened severity. But the likelihood for wire rope system motorcycle strikes is very, very low. Anyway, I think that hopefully sort of describes what's going on there. I do have a couple of fact sheets on that, which sort of goes through what I just said with a fact sheet. I wonder whether we can dig one out and pop it into the learning management system. The New Zealanders came up with a decent one, although they have taken it off their website and said they don't use it anymore. But anyway. Speed's so influential in the likelihood and severity of all crashes on the road network. I mean, we need to, yes, have some ability to move people around the network and vehicles around the network. So I'm not saying like make the whole network 20 kilometers an hour. I mean, that would be a very safe system, but we're completely acknowledge, which we're still we need to move people and goods around the network. But you can really influence likelihood and severity of crashes through advisory speeds, regulatory speeds, through the design, narrowing of roads, through local area traffic management. So many ways we can reduce the speed, either at individual locations or along lengths of road. Here's an advisory speed limit sign there, just to recognise that. Now, I'm not sure if we do or we don't have a quiz. I don't think we probably do for today, so we can probably keep ticking along, or do we?
We do have a quiz in the LMS.
Oh, I mean a poll, sorry.
Oh, sorry. My apologies.
No, my apologies. I used the wrong term.
We do. We've just got one.
I wonder what the question is. I can't even remember what I said, but it'll be one just to round out and yes, get people ready for the quiz.
It's a true or false. Would you like me to launch that?
Sure, launch it. Launch away. True or false? If using a proper helmet and good safety gear, a motorcyclist can be considered as a passenger vehicle car in safe system crash force tolerances. Oh, good. Okay. True, false, or unintelligible question. Give you a second for that, and then I might just show you back into the learning management system for fun. I'll give it 5 more seconds on that. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. End poll. Loving your work, everybody. No, I said that a couple of times. Sit somewhere between a passenger vehicle and a pedestrian or cyclist in terms of tolerable crash impact forces. So well done, everybody. Okay, let me just jump onto the learning management system in our last couple of minutes, and then I'll give you time to do that. So hopefully, Loretta, you're seeing my learning management system now.
Yes.
Good. So back in the Safe System Assessment course, and remember, you've got some resources here that you can refer to. You can see there the Safe System Assessment fact sheets that I talked about. So you can go to that, and the reference documents in there, lots of different things that you can have a look through in your own time. Then if we tick along, you've got obviously you've got to be finishing each of the quizzes. So module 1 quiz and module 2 quiz, plus the assignment, which quite a lot of you have done, and as you're getting marks back. We go into 3 here, which is the module that we've just done, and you'll see you've got the presentations, a couple of little extra videos if you want a bit more viewing, a bit more. I've pre-recorded a few things in there. I think, just trying to remember what it was. Oh yeah, I've got some stuff on some different intersection designs for cyclists, some interesting videos. I thought anybody who might want to watch a little bit more of that is welcome to. And then here's this untangling wire rope safety barriers for motorcycles. So that's a decent document, and a few other things that you might find of interest, integrating safe system into movement and place. But the thing you've got to do, and you can always tell by the little checkbox over here as to whether you completed it or not, you've got your module 3 quiz to finish. So I'm going to give you now 13 minutes back, finish your quiz, finish your module, get yourself ready, because next session we're giving you a bigger assignment to do, and we're going to, talk you through that. I miss anything, Loretta?
No, all good. Thanks, Cam.
Thank you, everybody. And good input today. Lots of interaction, lots of people coming up with good ideas, gave out a few prizes. We'll see you before the session on Friday for a chance to win a prize. And we'll go from there. Oh,
Okay.
module.
I'll got something come through, module tick box. That's okay. If you've completed it, that's the main thing, but I'll look at that. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.